Hey everyone. So we've been talking about expository writing, and I remember that I had promised you a couple videos showing something having to do with context and sequencing and just expository language overall. So today I wanted to actually do one of those videos, and when I was thinking of what to show you guys, I really wanted to kind of get away from what I teach you. And don't get me wrong, I really like teaching you things about the function of the English language and communication and how that works, and I love literature, and don't get me wrong, I love my content area, but I really wanted to do something different. So I was really trying to think of something that I could explain that I know and would also be beneficial for you guys to get introduced to and understand. And something that I thought of was sewing. I know that you guys are aware that I really like to dress up when we've had like spirit days and things like that. And I've always liked dressing up. I don't think I've gone a year not dressing up for Halloween. And in the recent past, I would say within the last 5 years, I've made a lot of my Halloween costumes by hand, by stitching them and sewing them together. One year I was Azula from Avatar: The Last Airbender. One year I was Link from Legend of Zelda. One year I was Zelda from Legend of Zelda. I've been a Pokemon trainer, a Hogwarts student from Slytherin, and weren't you, you were Zuko one year. And I've just always really liked sewing, and so that's kind of why I wanted to bring one of my passions to you guys, because I do think it's beneficial, and I don't feel like teachers really talk about what they like with their students, and I thought that'd be kind of an opportunity for me to open up to you guys a little bit more about who I am as a person. Now, you guys do have some notes in front of you right now, or at least you should. Make sure that you are writing down, is there a thesis? Am I using sequencing words? Am I revisiting my thesis? Am I providing context? I want to know pros and cons, put it all down there because we will be discussing this. And I guess I will get started on how to properly thread a needle in preparation for sewing. Alright, so here is the basic equipment you will need in preparation for sewing. The main reason that I think this is important to know is because it's really a life skill to be able to sew or do a quick stitch. You can be someone's saving grace or someone's hero of the day if someone has an accident or if a button comes off or a tear, and you can say, oh, I can sew this. And that can go for anybody, and so I just think it's a good life skill to have, which is why I kind of chose this for you guys. The first step in preparing to sew is just kind of assembling the basic equipment. So I have 4 things in front of you that I'm going to talk about, and I will also talk about a possible 5th instrument that you could use that I just tend to avoid. Obviously, the first thing you will need is a needle, and this one's pretty large. I normally don't use large needles because they're mainly used for more thick fabrics like maybe denim. In fact, denim I would probably use more of a sewing machine just because it's such a dense fabric. I normally go with a smaller needle, but the reason I'm showing you guys the bigger needle in this is simply for my audience to watch this and just to be a little bit more visual. Second thing you need is obviously thread, and thread comes in many colors. You can choose whichever you want. I just kind of went with red again for that visual effect. It just shows up a little bit better for you guys to see. The third instrument is called a needle threader. When I was younger, I actually didn't know the name of this, and I called it a cheater because it just kind of helped me do the needle threading, which is, I guess, why it's called a needle threader. The fourth thing that I use all the time when I sew are sewing scissors, and you can honestly use whatever scissors you want, but sewing scissors are a must for me because they are very sharp and they're used only on cloth or fabric. And if you use other scissors, that's fine, but it has a tendency to fray the end of your thread, and that can make threading your thread through the eye of the needle very, very frustrating and difficult. So again, I always recommend sewing scissors. There is another instrument that you can use, and I just tend to avoid it because I don't use it very well, but that would be a thimble. This one's pretty malleable, but normally they're metallic and very, very hard, and it's just meant to be worn over a finger as protection against the needle. I personally don't use them. They are safe to use, and I recommend that you should use them as a beginner. I do have a little over 5 years experience with sewing, and I just kind of like being able to feel where the needle is going to go. And so that's kind of why I just tend to avoid thimbles, but they are a safety feature, and I do recommend that you use one if this is your first time sewing. That's not to say that I've not had like pokes and prods and the occasional like scrape under the fingernail, which is not pleasant, but I just tend to avoid them. But again, I recommend that you do use that fifth instrument, which would be a thimble. Next, you need to measure and cut the thread. And something that you need to keep in mind, whatever amount that you want to sew with, you need to double that. So I normally go about 2 feet and have 1 foot of thread to work with. But just for this demonstration, I'm only going to use so much. I mostly eyeball it. You can definitely measure it out if you're one of those kinds of people. I just tend to overestimate what I'm going to use, cut it, and then use what I need to, and save the rest for whenever I need to do a touch-up or something like that. So you pull it out, I eyeball it. I'm going to want about half of this, so I think that looks good. I take my sewing scissors, and I just simply make that cut. And you'll notice that if you use sewing scissors, that can be a very, very direct cut, and it will prevent, again, fraying on your thread. I am currently done with both my thread and my scissors, so I'm going to go ahead and put those away. But if you're continuing a project, you'd want to keep them out. Then you need to thread the needle. And this can be very frustrating for a lot of people, people who have poor eyesight or people who are shaky. It can be very difficult to just simply thread this through the eye of the needle. The eye of the needle is that little hole at the top that you want to get the thread through. I honestly could probably thread this relatively easily, but again, I have a lot of experience, I have pretty steady hands, and I can do this all day long and not get tired of it, but it can cause eye strain as well, and just I want to avoid frustration at all costs, which is the reason this instrument exists, which is the needle threader. If you look at both of these instruments, you're going to notice that the eye of the needle threader is much, much larger. And so what you can do is thread the needle threader through the needle. And it goes through relatively easily. This creates a larger eye for you to actually thread your thread through. I always go through quite a bit more just in case I pull and it falls out, which I want to avoid just simply because it's more efficient to do it this way. So once you have that, you can just go ahead and start pulling the needle threader out of the needle, which pulls the thread along with it. And I am done with my needle threader. So I'm going to go ahead and put that off to the side. Now that my thread is through the needle, I have to actually prepare the knot itself. So I'm going to take my needle, I'm going to locate both of the edges or the ends of my thread. You want to pull them to where they are equal to each other. What you're going to do is I kind of just push them together, and then I take my index finger and my thumb and I pinch those two ends together. Locate the needle and I pull. This is really taut, and now I have something to work with. Finally, I need to make my knot at the end. If I don't, I just have two ends that can just go through fabric, and you want something to catch on your fabric when you go through so you have something to actually sew. Here's what I do to create the knot on my the end of my thread. I actually learned this from my grandmother, And my grandma taught this to me a long time ago, and it's helped me ever since I began sewing. I don't know if it's the official way to do it, but it's what's worked to me, and I do not fix what is not broken. What I do is that I take the thread and I get a little bit closer and I gather it, still keeping it kind of taut and tight. Keeping it pinched between my index finger and thumb, what I want to do is rotate thread around my index finger and then settle it into the crevice between my index finger and my thumb. I'm going to do that one more time. Keep it pinched, it's tight. I'm going to rotate that around my index finger and into the crevice between my index finger and my thumb. The very last thing you need to do to complete this knot is a trick where you kind of tangle the thread together and then pull to make the knot. And the way you do that is you push forward on your thumb and pull back on your index finger to make the threads tangle together. Once I see that the thread has been tangled, I'm going to take my middle finger and I'm going to place that right here, and I'm going to trap the tangled thread there where I can pull and make that knot. So I'm going to go ahead and place my finger, let go, and pull. At the end, you can see I now have a knot which will catch on the fabric that will be able to help me to continue to perform that stitch or that sewing process. Alright, so that is how you properly thread a needle in preparation for sewing. Thank you guys for watching this. I really appreciate it. I know it's not everyone's cup of tea, but I do think it's a really important skill to have and acquire and at least know about. Make sure on your notes you write down what sequencing words I used, any other positives, any negatives that you guys identified with this expository expression. I will have a link below that has kind of the expository written expression that I typed up, and you guys will notice that it really differs from how I talked. And please take away from this, those are two different languages between prescriptive language in the writing piece and then the descriptive language in the way I orated this. So just keep that in mind. Things will tend to differ, and I wanted to show you guys how I showed that through presentation versus written expression. So make sure you bring in those notes and we will be discussing those. Don't be afraid to learn. Bye guys. I have one more thing to show you guys. I completely forgot, but I was really excited about it. I worked on it for like 7 hours today, but it had to do with sewing. Some of my students know that in this year I'm going to be officiating a wedding for a couple of my friends, and so I'm in the wedding, and so is Cory and like a whole lot of us. And I was also asked to help make the ring bearer pillow that I had just finished today, and I wanted to show you guys how I did that. I'm not expecting you guys to do something of this caliber, but just to be able to do a simple stitch. But my friends and I, we don't really, okay, yeah, we're kind of nerds, but that's okay. But my friends asked me to make a Zelda-themed ring bearer pillow, and most of this was hand stitched, which started with the basics, which is what I went over with you guys just now. So just keep in mind that even though it may seem simple and basic, you guys can end up making some really amazing things just from those basic concepts. And I mostly just wanted to show this because I spent a lot of time on it today.